Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about the newest album from Tim McGraw, titled Damn Country Music. You know, it's rare I talk about titles when I review any albums, mostly because the title of a record only occasionally operates as a picture into what that album really is, and most often, not even that, it's typically a misnomer. But when a respected and established country hitmaker for around the past 20 years drops an album titled Damn Country Music, well, I'm gonna sit up and take notice. Not that much notice, mind you, this is Tim McGraw after all, a guy who his entire career has never been a hellraiser, typically performing very polished, very accessible, very adult contemporary country music. And it's also not like he's written a single song on this album. Most of that at this point is being handled by the Nashville songwriting machine, who have long ago recognized Tim McGraw as being a consistently bankable star. But I had to admit, I was kind of curious regardless, because the country music industry hasn't exactly been kind to Tim McGraw behind the scenes. To keep him locked under contract, his former label Curb Records shoveled out compilations and greatest hits albums instead of letting him release fresh material. And ever since he tore away to land on Big Machine, he's been working to crank out fresh albums every single year for the past 3 years. Now, I covered his album last year, Sundown Heaventown, and it was fine enough, showing some steps back toward the neo-traditional scene after steps toward a more synthetic mainstream embarrassed pretty much everyone involved. But it was definitely an uneven album, the moments of greatness balanced out by some truly god-awful songs. And frankly, I expected something somewhat similar here. Sure, the album was called Damn Country Music, but I didn't expect Tim McGraw to go all Hank Williams III on us. I expected it to fall into the same vein as his last album, a few stabs at the mainstream, maybe a little bit more neo-traditional if he was stepping back into his comfort zone. So, was I right? Well, actually, not quite. Damn Country Music, like most Tim McGraw albums, it's a bit scattershot, but I do see a broader selection of ideas on display and a slightly more cohesive sound, albeit one that isn't exactly breaking down barriers in modern country. Not a perfect record by any stretch, hell, I'd even be hesitant to call it a great album, but I do think it's a slight improvement on Sundown Heaventown, and it does take some risks, both instrumental and lyrical, that I think anyone would have expected from Tim McGraw, especially at this stage of his career. So, okay, what are these risks? Well, the first comes to note is in the instrumentation and production, which shows Tim McGraw following the vein of Dierks Bentley, Dustin Lynch, Kip Moore, and Brad Paisley in order to blend in more spacey synthesizers and electronic tones to create a slightly more atmospheric sound. And you know what? To Tim McGraw's credit, he gets it mostly right. The thicker bass grooves complement the melodic grooves pretty well. There are plenty of steel guitar and strings to smooth in some of the edges, and when the drum machines do kind of crop up, they're nestled deeper into the mix that they don't break cohesion. Now, there are a few exceptions. I've already talked about the stiffly warped Rollick on Top of the World, which continues Tim McGraw's tradition of lousy lead-off singles, talked about that on Billboard Breakdown, and the featuring presence of Big and Rich on California contributes very little beyond even brighter and cleaner tones, but overall, the sound of this album is pretty agreeable, even though I do feel the production is struggling to get the tonal balance to really work. On the one hand, with the exception of the daughter, Gracie McGraw, on the opening track, the backing vocals are almost universally too thin and way too synthetic to complement these songs, even against Tim McGraw's tenor, but on the other hand, the electric guitars have more sizzle and bite that I haven't heard since, well, Kip Moore's Wild Ones earlier this year. In fact, that album serves as a very good comparison, with Tim McGraw swapping out overly heavy percussion for some acoustic and steel guitar melodies that are more gentle and more country, and he even throws in some Celtic flute on Here Tonight that came through astoundingly well. I wish he did more of it. It sounds really good. And yet, I'm not gonna lie here, it feels a little bit weird to hear Tim McGraw against tones and grooves with this much texture and bite. And a lot of this ties into his vocals. As I said, he's never been much of a real hellraiser, and while you can tell that he's trying to add a little bit more grit to his voice on Love Runs, it's clear he's a little bit out of his wheelhouse here. It doesn't help that most of these songs play a little bit broadly in terms of their sound. Lots of strings and swell, and it can make some songs that can use a little bit more stripped back subtlety feel a little bit overdone and overwrought, even though I do think the melodies are quite solid. I think some of this comes to the drum balance as well. The cymbals seem to be mixed a little bit high in order to add a little bit more of an airy feel, and especially on California and Top of the World, they could have been toned back a little bit to give the melody a little bit more room to breathe and really accentuate these songs. But you know what? That's quibbles about the music. What about the lyrics? Are they as cutting as I hope? Well, believe it or not, I'd argue this album takes a few more chances beyond your typical love songs, your breakup songs, and your checklist tracks. Although in that last category, the most egregious is the Chris Janson co-written How'll Always Be, where Tim McGraw tries to cite his aversion to trendy crap, and I just snort with derision. That's barely even true on this album, dude. Come on, we're smarter than that. But the title track tackling a commitment to country music even after the fame starts to fade away, the weary melancholy of the breakup and what you're looking for as he knows the relationship just isn't working and he just wants to see her be happy even if it's not with him, or the generally cheesy, humble, and kind where he gives out some pretty agreeable life advice. Yeah, you know what? It's corny, but Tim McGraw's earnestness, it helps it click. But the song I really want to talk about is Don't Make Me Feel at Home, a mid-tempo ballad ballad that does admittedly feel a little bit overwrought, that feels Tim McGraw trying to find love and solace in an affair at a hotel away from a dysfunctional marriage. And what kind of blew my mind? There's no moral judgment, it's pitched right out the window. His spouse didn't even seem to care that he was finding his relief with this girl, which is a sort of Dan Savage-esque progressivism that I never expect to see on a country album. I know, sure, Tim McGraw's a known Democrat, but still, you don't normally see that sort of thing in country handled with this level of nuance, especially in the mainstream. I kind of wish it was played a little bit more intimately, a little bit more down to earth, and probably hit a lot harder, but still a very interesting choice to include that song on the album, and I'll admit, I kind of really liked it. So look, I'm not going to say this album is going to blow your mind. I don't think across Tim McGraw's entire discography there's been an album that would fit that. But you know what? Damn country music shows an artist that's a little bit restless and willing to push his boundaries, instrumental and with the songs he's choosing. Again, he doesn't have any writing credits on this album. And while there are plenty of country acts, traditional, neo-traditional, and from the indie scene that are more interesting songwriters and are bucking Nashville's tendencies a lot more effectively, it's nice to see Tim McGraw back on the right side of history. So for me, it's a very strong 6 out of 10 and definitely a recommendation if you are a fan. It might only be a small step in the right direction, but it is still a step, and that's ultimately what really matters. So check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums you'd like that you want me to take a look at, I'll try to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.